All right. So let's start with getting involved in a Super Bowl. So Allison, Pat, Stephanie, how did you first become involved with the Super Bowl bid process for your city? And then what was most exciting / daunting of taking on that task?
I had spent my career in sports. I worked at the Indiana Sports Corporation, which was the first sports commission in the country, as Indianapolis was trying to build a sports strategy and bring more sporting events. So for 20 years, I had worked in Indianapolis trying to bring major sporting events. We had completed about 400 events. We had 4 men's Final Fours. We had the single largest sporting event in the world every year, the Indy 500. So as we built our business and our community brand around sports, of course, the Super Bowl was always at the end there, and we knew at the right time we were going to bid for a Super Bowl and hopefully win. So we bid in 2006 for the 11th Super Bowl. We did not get it, and then in 2008 we bid for the 12th Super Bowl, and we got it. So for our city and our community, it was a little bit of a natural progression towards, from having the Pan American Games, World Championships, Olympic trials, men's and women's Final Fours, and so forth. So it was part of our strategy, and we had a great time doing the bid, and thankful that we got one.
Yeah. And how about in San Francisco?
So I spent about over 30 years as the marketing business guy for the San Francisco Giants, and the new chairman of the host committee. The only Super Bowl that ever been held in the Bay Area was 1985, and so with the 49ers building this new stadium coming out of the ground, they had a host committee chairman and asked if I would help them, put the bid together. And to be honest, I wasn't really sure what I was getting into, but it was an incredible experience. The first part of it was to, our sales pitch to the NFL was to try to convince the NFL that they ought to actually consider the Bay Area after all these years of sort of not considering us. A lot of reasons why, and didn't really have a good place to play. But my role was really to figure out how to raise the money to make it happen, and actually fill in the blanks to the RFP that Frank sent us, which was 150 pages long, which covered everything. And we put our cast of characters together in a plan, and fortunately we were awarded the 50th Super Bowl. We would have been happy at that time, I could say this, with either the 50th or the 51st, but we were awarded the 50th. And then on the way home, we kind of said, oh my God, now we actually have to do this. So anyway.
Yeah.
So Frank, what is the NFL side of the experience? What are you looking for when it comes to picking a host city, and what's in that 150-page RFP?
Well, it really depends on who is looking at the bid. So at the end of the day, my job was to help facilitate the collection of bids that would be almost impossible to differentiate. Just 3 great bids a year. And my job was to help the host cities, whether it be Indianapolis or the Bay Area or anybody else, to come up with the very best plan. At the end of the day, it's actually the 32 owners of the National Football League, the 32 team owners, who vote on that. So how they make the determinations are, well, I can't put myself in the head of a billionaire team owner. But what I do know is that there is a financial aspect to it. There is a stadium and experiential aspect to it in terms of what the guests and the fans are going to encounter and experience. And there's a novelty factor, what's unique, what's different. There's a legacy factor. And these are 2 cities that, when it came to legacies, second to none. What does a Super Bowl do after the NFL leaves town? What does it do for that city? How is it going to fulfill the mission of a sports commission or the city fathers or a host committee? And what good is it going to leave behind? And frankly, in the case of these 2 cities, which were both remarkable, it was the legacy program that I think turned the most heads because of the uniqueness of it and the impact of it in the marketplace after we had folded our tents and went home.
So Stephanie, how do you believe that you got San Francisco to stand out? So what did you do in your bid process to make yours jump off the page?
I think, as Frank was saying, it really was the legacy component. So we saw this as an opportunity to not only have a Super Bowl come that we hadn't had in 30 years, but really to figure out what's the impact that we could have on our community. And we saw this as such a catalyst for good. And so from the beginning, our goal was to be the most giving Super Bowl. We had the opportunity to host the biggest celebration the NFL had ever had, the 50th Super Bowl, this milestone moment. So to be able to use that to benefit our community and everyone in it was a goal that we set. And so we set aside 25% of all the money that we raised on a corporate basis, and we self-funded our Super Bowl. So that was a significant amount of money. And at the end of the day, we gave $13 million back into the community. And so setting out that model in the beginning of not only we have these wonderful offerings and wonderful food and amazing hotbed of technology, but the legacy component of what could be left after a Super Bowl and the springboard that it could create we felt a great differentiator for us.
Mm-hmm.
And Allison, you don't have to sell me on how great Indianapolis
Yeah.
is, but how did you convince 32 owners to let Indianapolis host the city?
Yeah, it was a great experience doing the bid, and working with Frank was fabulous. One of the things that we focused on is what are your weaknesses as a city? Indianapolis, it doesn't jump off the page as necessarily a Super Bowl city. So we took all the things the NFL owners could question and say in their minds, is Indianapolis ready for a Super Bowl? And then try to take those things as to be strengths. Frank talked about the financial component of the Super Bowl. So we pre-raised our money. We were the first city to ever do the bid where we walked in with all of our money. We raised $26 million prior to the Super Bowl, walked in with the pledge letters at the bid and said, we've got the money right here. So don't wonder or worry that we won't be able to raise our funds. So that was the first thing. The second thing on the experiential side of it that Frank was referring to, most of the Super Bowl cities other than Atlanta and New Orleans really had a spread out footprint. So if you look at Miami, if you look at Phoenix, Houston, very, very spread out footprint. We were very condensed. We have a very compact downtown. Most of our hotel rooms are downtown. Everything's connected, which frankly I think made some of the owners a little nervous because it was so condensed. So we went to a plan very similar used by the Salt Lake Olympics when they did the Olympics in the 90s, and said, we're going to take the downtown core and make it like the Olympics, Meadows Plaza, and turn it into Super Bowl Village. And we did a lot of things in that area, but we took our downtown compactness and took the worries off the plate on the things that they could be worried about. And the third thing we did, as Stephanie was talking about, we really focused on legacy. And we had a lot of different projects in legacy, but we really focused mostly on the near east side of Indianapolis, which was a really challenging neighborhood. And we took it by storm in a plan to be able to change housing, to build a youth education center, to really revitalize the neighborhood. And as a part of that, for the bid, we decided to, and this was actually a funny conversation I had with Frank that day, we decided to present our bid. It's always a challenge with the Super Bowl host committees. How are you going to, bid committees at the time, how are you going to actually present your bid to the owners to get their attention and make sure they're going to open it and read it? And we were in a planning session with the current athletic director of Notre Dame, Jack Swarbrick, who was one of our bid chairs. And he came up with a crazy idea to say, well, why don't we have 8th graders who are going to be seniors in 2012 when we have the Super Bowl? Let's fly 8th graders all around the country and have them actually meet with the owners and present our bid in 15 minutes. And I had an 8th grader at the time, and I thought, there is no way that's a good idea. But as we talked through it for the next couple of hours, it became more and more apparent to us that really what our message was this was going to be great for the community, as Pat and Stephanie shared, and that impact of youth and what we could do for the youth of Indianapolis at the Super Bowl was a critical part of our bid. So I called Frank and I said, this is how we're going to deliver our bids, and I'll never forget what you said to me. You said, are you sure that you want to take all the work you've been doing for 2 years in a bid and leave it in the hands of an 8th grader? And I said, yeah, we're going to do it. So we did that. And it was actually one of the most fun days of my career, sending off all those 8th graders across the country to meet with Jerry Jones and all the other owners to do that. So I think we grabbed their attention on that.
And Frank, how'd the owners take that?
Some of them actually got in touch with me afterwards and were incredibly impressed. It really put a human face on Indianapolis's bid. Because at that point, the only face that they knew was Jim Irsay's, the Indianapolis Colts owner. This really gave it a very human look, and the message behind it, which I think was really the thing that put it over the top, was, we're not going to build a house, we're not going to build 5 houses. We're going to restore a neighborhood, and we're going to help develop a commercial district for a neighborhood where people who can barely afford a bus ride have to take a bus ride to get their groceries. So it just humanized the whole thing. It was Indianapolis' second kick at the can, as Allison had mentioned, and they really wanted to bring not only the legacy piece in, but also the welcome that the owners would receive and that their fans would receive if their team was lucky enough to play in the Super Bowl, because that compact Super Bowl village that she mentioned, one thing she didn't mention was that the stadium is actually in that 16 blocks of downtown. So, the experience is you get to your hotel, you roll out of your hotel, you can walk through this amazing, call it amusement park of football, and into the stadium, and then back to your hotel. You never have to drive, get stuck in traffic. It was really a very, very well done, well thought out plan.
And Pat and Stephanie, you kind of had the reverse with covering so much region. How did you take that into account, the geography of the Bay Area being so widespread?
Well, any of you who know anything about the Bay Area know that the Bay itself, it's a physical barrier, but it's sort of a psychological barrier in a way. You have San Francisco here, you have 45 miles to the south. You have San Jose, you have Oakland across the Bay. And I used to get up when I'd make these speeches, and I tried that. I used to say, the Super Bowl 50 is the first thing that the Bay Area has ever agreed on. And then I'd shut up, and then people would start to laugh, because the Bay Area's never agreed on anything. So we had to figure out a way to somehow bring all this stuff together. So the legacy piece was a big part of it. But, if you had to boil down our sales pitch to the NFL and to the locals, it really was, if you're going to celebrate 50 years of Super Bowls with all the history and tradition, but more importantly, you're going to look forward to the next 50. There's only one place in the world that you can do this, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. And part of it, Allison talking about 8th graders, we said, well, how can we talk about the junction of technology, innovation, all this, and not present our bid in an interesting way? So Apple was one of our. I'll tell you, Google was the first company who got involved with this. Apple was the company who said, we'll give you devices. So we were going to put the bid on an iPad mini, which is, something to do. But then you realize that a lot of the NFL owners, I hate to say it, but they're kind of like, like me. I mean, some of these guys maybe could send an email at that time. I don't know. But we weren't sure that it would be. As a matter of fact, one of the owners, I won't say who it was, we put the presentation in a big white box with the iPad mini in it that would, if you took the lid off the box, the presentation would start. And so one of the owners got it, and his assistant just couldn't resist. So she opened the box, and the presentation started, and she didn't know how to stop it. So she called us, and we couldn't figure it out either. So we wound up sending another one to do it. But it was but I think that the point was, you have 15 minutes when you present your bid to the owners, and it's pretty intimidating. You're in a room with, 200-300 people in these high back leather chairs who, they have screens up there, and it's a frightening. I said, maybe it feels like this when they're about to elect a pope. I don't really know, but it was a very intimidating feeling being in there. And also when you walk out, it's not like you get any applause or anything. It's silence. And you walk out and you go, God, did we blow it or what? The great thing is that the way it's set up is the NFL Network was set up to help record the bid process, not only from where the team rooms or the city rooms were, but they would check and see what the reaction was. And so we go back to our green room, and we're kind of sitting there, and then all of a sudden, which comes on the screen, the bidding was done. And so the commissioner gets up and reads this thing. I'm proud to award the 50th Super Bowl to San Francisco. Well, we jump up like crazy, you know. Fortunately, they said they had a 2 or 3 second delay on it, maybe longer. So, you know, if somebody had said a bad word or something, it wouldn't go out on the NFL Network. And so it was a very exciting piece of it. They also caught the, you know, sort of the losing green room at the same time. But it was all part of the, you know, part of the incredible experience of going through that. And it was, like I say, getting people in the Bay Area. Our big challenge was getting people, having the glue that would hold us together in the Bay Area. The legacy piece of it for us, taking 25% of all the money that we had to raise, because we didn't qualify, there was no public funding at all. So we had to do everything from scratch. So we had to raise 25% more money than we would have otherwise. But as it turned out, the legacy was sort of the glue that held together. And it got people around the Bay Area who said, you know, okay, I feel like this about football, about the NFL, but I get doing something that's good for people. And that was really maybe one of the proudest things of our experience.
Mike, can I ask Allison? I know this is unorthodox. You ask questions, I answer them. But talk about the scarves.
Oh,
Because you know what, that was a legacy piece that is not often remembered, but was incredibly impactful even on feature television. But talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I had one of those, I don't know if any of you have had a day like this, but I had one of those days about 2.5, 3 years before the Super Bowl that you can't keep up with everything. I probably had 2,000-3,000 emails that day, tons and tons of phone calls. My voicemail kept shutting down. And what it was people in the community reaching out saying, how can I help? We know it's 2-3 years ahead of the Super Bowl, but we want to help, we want to do something. Many of those folks were retired. Many of them had time on their hands, and I just didn't have enough projects to pass out. You know, back to what Pat's saying, getting the community really involved in everything you're doing is so important so that they don't look at it just as a heads and beds economic impact event. So after a long day at work, I went home and sat down with a friend and said, oh my gosh, I had the most frustrating day. And we talked about how do you engage these people that want to be engaged this early. So we came up with this crazy idea to ask people to knit scarves for our volunteers because it was February, it was going to be cold in Indiana. So I came up with this plan. We're going to have people knit scarves, any style, themselves, knit or crochet, blue and white, and then we were going to put patches on them, Super Bowl, and they'd be given to the volunteers. So volunteers would have them. So it's service. You know, we all want to do things for service, and if people knitted, then the volunteers would get them. Well, we had some naysayers at the beginning. Our chairman actually said to me, I came to him with the idea, and he said, I don't think Super Bowl and knitting go in the same sentence, so I don't think we should do that. But I got him over the hump, and by the way, he wore his scarf for 2 years. But we ended up getting 13,000 scarves from around the world, people that had connections to Indiana from all parts of the globe that sent them in. If you're in Africa working for Eli Lilly and Company, which is headquartered in Indiana, that was their connection to the Super Bowl. And we had our women's prison sewed the patches onto the scarves, so it was a huge community effort and something that really pulled people together and unified everybody.
So let's talk about the social impact of a Super Bowl that brings. So you have 4 years that you're planning for it, but then it comes to town. So talk about some of the other community involvement and engagements that happened, and then Frank, if you want to chime with other things outside of Indianapolis and San Francisco that you saw that was really interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, one of the things that we did was a program called Playmakers, and I think this was the favorite program in our organization. For 50 weeks, we identified a small nonprofit that would receive a grant. And so we did big grants of $500,000, but this program was really focused on finding the people in the community that were making an impact locally. So it was a $10,000 grant for an organization where $10,000 would really make a real impact. But the piece about it that we loved is we also had them identify either that volunteer or staff member or board member who was their playmaker, the person who made a difference, and to highlight, that an individual can really make an impact and be a role model for everyone else. And so we went in then and sent a camera crew in. They filmed a whole story, and we worked with a really wonderful social enterprise called Baycat, which is in the San Francisco area. And they had young kids that were coming in from the inner city of San Francisco learning digital skills. So we had this kind of great end-to-end opportunity of legacy. And these stories, we would watch in our office every week and would be crying at these stories because they would be just these amazing people that were doing like truly amazing things. And then we were able to take that piece of film that was created and give it to the nonprofits who none of them had ever had a marketing piece before. So now they had their story captured on film. So those are the things that for us made so much impact, is just to hear all these individual stories in the community and then be able to share those stories. So the dollars were great. It was great to be able to give out wonderful grants, but to be able to highlight some of the work that was being done. And then we partnered with the NFL to create our Giant 50. So there's always, the giant numbers that you see where you can have your photo taken in front of the Roman numerals. We had 50, so we had the 50 in our Super Bowl city, and you'll have to have Pat tell you the story about the Roman numerals because that's.
I might as well tell it. So the Super Bowl 50 was the first Super Bowl that had an actual number rather than a Roman numeral, and so when we got it, we were real excited about having Super Bowl 50, but then somebody pointed out, do you know what the Roman numeral is for 50? It's L, which you kind of said, it's kind of the wimpiest of the Roman numerals in a sense. So we thought it was we said, well, I wonder if there's anything we can do about that. Also, digitally, if you're having a digital address, it winds up being Super Bowl with 2 L's, which was another sort of issue. So we actually went and talked to the NFL. It was really great. They listened. And we said, is there any way that we could use 50 instead of L? And they listened, and they were obviously, it was a big decision that they had to go through. And we learned later that they had sort of the same issues. So we wound up, we came to an agreement. The NFL announced their Super Bowl 50 mark. We announced our Super Bowl 50 mark. And it really got a lot of fanfare, except the one thing that happened, we got this letter that actually the commissioner got and we got, and it was from the CEO of an organization called the Roman Numeral Society of America. Upset. The NFL and the Super Bowl was like the last bastion of promoting, and so we kind of looked at it, we took it seriously. As it turned out, it was sort of a ruse by some pretty funny person, but anyway, it was a total keeper, and it's just you can't do anything sort of without being noticed. And
you're on a big stage.
You're on the big stage, yeah.
And that Giant 50 enabled us to have not only this great, photo moment for people, but we then made it a walkthrough for the first time. And so inside, you would walk through Super Bowl City, and you get to see all these stories of all these individuals and the impact that they had. So all of our Playmakers got this opportunity to be seen. So 1 million people going through got to see, to us, what makes the Bay Area so special is just all these people coming together to help the community. So.
We had a couple programs that we felt really were great legacy. Back to your question, two things. We did build an $11 million youth education and health and wellness center, which is still thriving today, 6 years later. Very successful. Many kids and families use that facility in the neighborhood, so that's got a long-term impact. And then secondly, we chose to do a breast cancer project. Indianapolis is the only place in the world that has a tissue bank where women can donate healthy breast tissue for breast cancer research. And Frank had encouraged us early on to take any Indianapolis, Indiana asset that was unique and try to leverage that for the Super Bowl in some way to make those, to strengthen those organizations and lift them up. So we did that with the Breast Tissue Center, and we had over 1,000 women weekend before Super Bowl came and donated healthy breast tissue for breast cancer research, and the results from that donation are really making huge advancements in curing and identifying breast cancer. So that's a project that we'll continue to give as we go forward. And it was really an amazing sight that weekend when we had 1,000 women lined up who have healthy breasts but volunteered to donate tissue for research.
And Frank, on top of these two wonderful cities that did amazing work, was there any in the other 8 Super Bowls that community impact project that stood out?
There have been many. I'll mention one, and it's great that we're talking about this because, when you've got 9 hours of television on Super Bowl Sunday, it's remarkable that you never hear any of this, which is a shame, because it's really inspirational. And clearly had inspirational stories here. In North Texas in 2011, there was a program called Slant 45. which stood for Service Learning Adventures in North Texas. And that host committee provided grants to neighborhoods and kids, basically. So it was all done through the schools. And what the kids had to do, or the classes had to do, was submit a proposal, like a grant proposal. So it taught them how to write a grant proposal and say, what do you want to accomplish? What good thing can you do in your community? And how much is it going to cost? And there were literally hundreds of these programs, hundreds, right down to, and the one I remember, because it's so inconsequential globally, was a group that was going to remove graffiti from its school. Needed $500. Wow. And so the kids got together and used the $500 to buy the materials that they needed on the budget that they had provided, and they cleaned up their school. Well, multiply that times hundreds of schools and libraries and all across this 1,600 square mile footprint of Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, Irving, area. And a program like that, just from the grassroots, and as an educational program, as a quality of life program, as a legacy program, it was just outstanding.
So let's pivot to this year's Super Bowl. It's coming up here in Minneapolis. Give us an inside look into what their host committee and host team is going through right now.
They're not sleeping, for sure. They're definitely not sleeping.
They're not warm either.
Yeah.
I would say probably still getting over whatever their emotions were about their home team getting into the Super Bowl, which, if you think about it, would have added a whole different dimension to this. So, they're not sleeping right now, for sure.
Yeah.
And a couple of the people that worked on our host committee are there. And so we've talked to them or have tried to talk to them. So one said, thank you for sending a text that just said, we wish you luck and feel good, and not a long one, because I can't read anything more because I'm getting 3,000 emails a day.
Yeah. It's and now they finally know who their teams are, which makes a big difference. Prior to that, you're just sort of waiting and waiting and waiting. Now that they know their teams, they can deploy their plans. But that last 3 months, these guys, and Frank knows better than anybody, that last 3 months, it's 22 hours a day, 7 days a week. You lay down and sleep when you can. There's just so much to do once you get to this point.
And Allison, can you talk to the weather? Because Indianapolis had great weather Super Bowl week.
Yes, it did.
But that I'm sure you had to plan for a Indianapolis winter. Is that what's Minneapolis going through right now with that?
Yeah, the weather issue, that was another thing that we had to make sure we were completely buttoned up on. The year before, unfortunately for Dallas, they did have a massive snow and ice storm in 2011, so we were down there with them, learned some good lessons. And the key with all that is making sure all the agencies are working together. We had a bulletproof weather plan. If we had bad weather, I felt 100% confident and put my head on the pillow at night not worrying about weather, because we worked with 27 different agencies and groups for over 2 years on our weather plan. So we didn't actually enact it, but we did share our plan with the NFL after, and I know they've shared it with other cities. So what they're doing right now is praying that they can have cold weather and snow. Ice is a little bit of a challenge when you're trying to move people around, which unfortunately for Dallas was what they encountered.
And it's a good thing you did share that, because in just a couple of years after that, we were here in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, and that was Super Bowl 48, which was my last for the NFL. Not related to the weather, but it was, we had the polar vortexes coming through here, vortices coming through here. Temperatures were in the single digits. When we opened the fan festival on Broadway, it was called Super Bowl Boulevard. It was a big open floor plan for that, from 34th to 48th Street. It was 16 degrees. It was cold. We still had 1.5 million people on the street, but which is kind of the power of both the New York metropolitan area and the Super Bowl combined. But we had to enact a snow plan, I think it was 4 or 5 times between January 2nd and March 2nd, which was during the construction and load-in period, and then after. What was really interesting was we had taken all of these measures. It was also the first outdoor Super Bowl in a winter market. So Lucas Oil Stadium is covered, right? It's an indoor stadium. This was the first outdoor stadium. So we had to actually add to that plan because, does anybody know how you take snow out of a stadium? Okay, you take it out by hand shoveling one row at a time and dumping it in the aisle in a chute that sends the snow down to the field, which is exactly where you don't want it, right? So we were doing that. We did that 4 or 5 times, and so you know, if it had snowed on Saturday before Super Bowl, you know, it's hard for people to understand how you cannot be ready. But with all the stuff that we had built onto the floor of the stadium, including the halftime stages that were hidden there and a bunch of other things, would have been near impossible. So we had to have contingency plans to play the game on Monday night, on Tuesday, the following Sunday, if you had, you know, a 3-foot blizzard, if the market was behobbled. Interestingly, we actually also had media sitting outside, which they'd never done. Media loves sitting outside in the cold. They love that. They don't love that. Actually,
Frozen.
you know, nobody sits outside even at MetLife Stadium, you know, for a normal game if they're covering it. So we had a bunch of people out there. So we built, and it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. We put radiant heat over them, under an overhang. We had some heat in the floorboards and things of that nature. And so, of course, after record cold in this area, if you guys were here, you'd know that. On game day, it was 50 degrees.
It's beautiful.
And all this stuff was cooking. And it was the first time we actually had a social media command center in our control room. And I got a tap on the shoulder. I said, the media are complaining that they feel like French fries at McDonald's. So can you shut off the heat, please? And so we actually responded to that, and we said, social media can actually be a really
Absolutely.
good
Yes.
Tool for us to be responsive on an operational level. We had never looked at it that way before, but of course, it 50 degrees, and then the next day we had a snowstorm. By 2 o'clock in the morning, it is snowing, so my job at that point, thinking you can breathe a sigh of relief, no. The Denver Broncos are stuck on the ground. Their planes are stuck on the ground, and we're working with the Port Authority to try to get them out.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about what you're up to today. So I'd love to hear how your experience with the Super Bowl has impacted your current position.
Right now, I am overseeing all the master and event planning at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And after I transitioned through Super Bowl, there's not a lot of events that are bigger than the Super Bowl, but the Indianapolis 500 is one of them because we have about 5 times the amount of people as a regular NFL game. We've got over 350,000 people on our property on race day. And so I learned a lot of lessons at the Super Bowl on the million pieces of puzzle that go into putting a big event like that together. And so now overseeing all the planning and execution at the Indy 500, which has been great. We've got 3 major concerts that weekend, so it's not just the race itself. Like the Super Bowl, there's tons of things that go on around it that aren't necessarily covered on national television, but we've got 3 great concerts, an EDM concert, a country concert, and a rock concert. We have a whole month of activities. We actually have a race on our road course mid-month, and tons of days that we're open, practice, and so forth. So the Super Bowl really is a month-long event when you get down to it, and the Indy 500 is a month-long event when you get down to it. So that's what I'm doing now, and I'm really enjoying it.
So this is an example of why you try to work with people and make them your friends. Because I work with Allison on the Indy 500.
We grabbed Frank and brought him in.
And I work on the pre-race show. So I run my own event management and production company now, and the Indy 500 is one of our incredible clients. We're working on the redevelopment of the South Street Seaport, and the Pier 17 will be opening this spring. We hope you're all going to come down there and check it out because it really is transforming Lower Manhattan. The Super Bowl was a stop along the way for me. I'm a career habitual events addict. I've tried to go to Events Anonymous, doesn't work, and I just have to go in and say, I'm sorry, I just love working on these big things because they're giant puzzles, and every one of them is different. So, I started with Radio City Music Hall in the events group. My first Super Bowl was actually working on the halftime show in 1988, Super Bowl 22. Then I was in charge of events for the NHL for 13 years, then the NFL for 10. So now with this trove of experience, I've been able to work with groups really all over the world on just making their events better, helping them do a better job of putting those events together. And that's, having a credential like the Super Bowl is one that you wave proudly because, to be honest, inclusive of the person who replaced me, in 52 years, there's only been 4 people who've run Super Bowls. And some of us are older now, and so I was the third, and it was a great honor, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
So we'll chime in on this thing, but this sort of happened in that I guess we were still sort of convalescing from the experience, in the weeks and months afterwards, and Stephanie, who led marketing and communications for our Super Bowl, said, so you have to write about this, and I'm kind of going, not really sure. She said, well, what if we do this together? So I said, I don't really know. So I started writing some stuff down, and then I started writing a bunch of stuff down, and Stephanie sort of took what I wrote and sort of cleaned it up. And in the process, we found a publisher, and we never really intended, but we wound up writing a book about it, which was a great segue, Mike, thank you, is that we wrote a book about the experience, and it was meant to be a book with some of the lessons that we learned. It's not a sort of a kiss and tell book. Some people say, "God, I wish you said more of that stuff," and we didn't. We just talked about the incredible experience and tried to give a feel for planning a Super Bowl and the organizations you need is sort of like a startup company, and we put this thing together. So as part of publishing a book, the publisher also wants you to do an audio version. So Stephanie talked me into actually narrating the entire book.
Because he has a beautiful voice.
Well, no. And so I sat there for like a month and had to perform the book, and then I gave it to Stephanie, who edited it. And so
that was mistake number 1.
Big mistake. So at the end, I said, "Aren't you getting tired of hearing me talk?" And she's great. She's very diplomatic. She says, "Well, I'm not, but I think my husband Mike is." So we've been, we've pushed the book. We've been actually talking about it. We're proud of it. A lot of universities have used it in their sports management programs, and it actually applies to other things other than the event. And why don't you? I will, but why don't you just tell the group what you're doing now?
Yeah, and so after writing the book with Pat, it was such a great experience to work with a colleague on it, but also just to memorialize what we did, because as we were saying before, when you work in events, like, you're on to the next thing. You never think about what you actually did, so it's like, okay, what's next? And to memorialize what happened and to put it in a book, all the people that we work with said, oh my goodness, it's actually on paper. I can remember and go back to what happened and all those funny moments that we had together. But now I've founded a consultancy that works with athletes. So I've worked in sports marketing for 20 years, and working with athletes, you realize that not all athletes have access to the same resources. And every athlete has an amazing story to tell, and they all have a platform from which they can tell it. And so we help them to determine what their narrative is, to really figure out what they want to stand for, and then help them to amplify that and use their platforms for good. And it's been an amazing experience working with athletes across all spectrums, from NFL to US to Olympic and beyond, and really helping them to determine what they want to do and what they want to stand for beyond sports.
So what I'll just say, I took a total left turn, and interestingly, I'm doing some work with the Walt Disney family, who actually, this was Walt Disney's daughter and her husband, who ran Disney for a while, who happened to live in the Bay Area. They developed this incredible museum, but what I'm helping them figure out is to take if Walt Disney was still alive, what would he be doing now? He probably wouldn't be sitting around. And so the idea is to take the art and science of animation, and it's an incredible way to help kids learn because it combines, art, science, drawing, music, math, all those. So actually helping them figure out a way to develop educational programs that will help do that, which is a real satisfying thing for me to do.
Perfect. I do want to open up to audience questions. So if people want to start lining up, we do have mics on both sides. Actually, go ahead.
Thanks for coming. My question is about the halftime entertainment and how that's scheduled and how much say, if any, the city has in scheduling that or who the performer actually is.
Oh, that's what an easy question. They have none.
Zero.
All him. All him.
No, actually, it wasn't me at all. And so I had no say in it either. It was actually a broadcasting decision. So it was a conversation with the NFL Network, who actually subcontracts the Super Bowl halftime to a company to do. My job was more to make sure it got on and got off in a hurry. Imagine, if you would, that you have 8 minutes to set up a pop rock show and 12 minutes to do the show and 7 minutes to get rid of it, and make sure you don't leave anything behind that a player can trip on or get hurt by. So that is what my life is like during that very frenetic 28 minutes. But in terms of selecting the talent, it's a broadcast decision typically.
I told people, I didn't go through that whole explanation. I told people that they asked me who was going to perform. Everybody would ask that. And I said, you know what? If I told you, then I'd have to kill you. So I had no idea who it was going to be, but I didn't want to explain that I had nothing to do with it.
Great. Thanks for coming. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how big data and analytics helped you either put together the bid for your city or helped with the planning for the Super Bowl.
Well, from a planning perspective, so sitting where we were in the Bay Area, we had a lot of pressure on our shoulders to really showcase the technology of the region. It was really important to us, and we had a tremendous number of amazing partners like SAP, in addition to Google, SAP and HPE, and this kind of swath of people that were coming together to be able to help us. So from a data perspective, we used it in kind of a number of different ways. Super Bowl City was the location. It's a free public fan village that every host committee puts on. So ours was called Super Bowl City. And we had 1 million people coming through. So we had to know at all times how people were coming through, how they were using Super Bowl City, how they were in the layout, because we had to make sure that they were safe, that they could get around easily, that we had all the services prepared for them. So being able to have that back-end network to be able to help us understand. We also were able to then use the data to help us engage people. So we had big giant screens up where people could be engaging either through augmented reality games, virtual reality games, and be able to see themselves on screen and be able to participate that way. And then with Google in particular, we had the first ever fan app. I know that sounds probably pretty pedestrian, but there had never been an app developed for the public experience, or it had been an app for the game itself, but to actually have an app for the fan experience where you have these 1 million people coming through had never happened before. So Google enabled that for us. They were our partner in helping us to produce that, and then also enabled us to work with them on maps. So all these little things you have to think about of moving all these hundreds of thousands of people around the Bay Area. And as Pat was saying, we were 43 miles away from our stadium location. Of all the NFL cities, it's the furthest city center from a stadium. So it was a really significant operational challenge we had in terms of transportation.
Here's another way, real quickly, another way is that we didn't do an economic impact study ahead of time in order to attract the Super Bowl. But a year out, we said, we need to figure out a way to collect the data so that we can, after this is all over with, we can report not on what we thought happened or what somebody said, but actually what happened. So the amount of data that was collected in terms of the number of people the number of eyeballs, the number of experiences that were shared, the other elements of it were we could actually report, here's exactly what happened. And one of our partners actually helped us do that. So we thought it would be helpful to report on it, but also for whoever's doing this in the future.
Yeah, and the Google Maps piece was amazing. To be able to work with the team to get Super Bowl city placed and to have all the street closures marked off, because no one's going to go into our app to determine where to go. They're going to go where they go. They go to Google Maps. So to be able to use those types of tools to actually enable movement was huge for our region and really helped to facilitate so many, remove some of those pain points of moving people around.
Great, thank you.
Earlier, you were talking about how Indianapolis had that closely knit, tied together area where you had to plan the stadium and the hotels and whatnot. And you were mentioning that the owners were concerned about that, but I don't quite understand how they were concerned about it, especially since, as you said, having everything close together like that makes transportation and engagement easier.
Yeah, I would say traditionally, Super Bowls were not as condensed. And so I think the concern was, how do you fit that many people that close together with all the activities that have to go on and not just create gridlock to a point? Because downtown, we've got residents, many residents that live there, many businesses that function. So how do you take that 16-block area, still let people live in it, still let people work in it, and then bring in hundreds of thousands of other people and get that to function without everything just shutting down? And so that was really the challenge. And we had to make sure the NFL had confidence in us that we would be able to execute that. And so that was really the concern. But I think after that, Frank and his team worked really closely on that layout with us. We met with businesses all the time. We had all kinds of town forums to be able to have businesses come in and say, this is how your employees are going to be impacted. This is days we'd like you to let them out early. These are days we'd like you to let them maybe stay home and work in the morning. So it was that constant communication and transparency working with those businesses that made it work in the end. And again, Frank was a good partner on that, and I think they used that model a little bit going forward at other Super Bowls on that real detail planning.
Yeah, and Minneapolis is going to face the
Yep.
same kind of
Yes.
thing because their stadium is right at the edge of their downtown area. I do want to thank you for also having the state capitol right
Yes,
there.
we have the state capitol, state
on
government
top of
right in the
everything
middle of
else,
it.
you have the center of the state government. And at the time, there was a labor dispute
Yes.
brewing, which was Indiana was converting to a right-to-work state. So, of course, there were an enormous number of union personnel who took that very hard for obvious reasons. And what was really interesting about it, this is like the power of what a Super Bowl does. I actually watched when the vote was taken to be a right-to-work state, all of a sudden there were thousands of people mobilized outside the state capitol, and they all decide to march on Super Bowl Village.
Yeah.
Thousands of them.
Yeah.
And there's a big crowd of people at Super Bowl Village on top of that. So I, of course, alert the people I need to alert that something like that is about to happen, and I'm watching it go. And then it finds its way into Super Bowl Village, and the next thing I do is take a photo of the protesters with their signs down, standing in a circle, holding a beer, having a great time.
Yes, in line
So
to go on the zip line. They wanted to go on the zip line.
And they're online to go to on the zip
Yeah.
line. So it just became everybody's party
Yeah.
at the end of the
They
day.
got absorbed into the atmosphere.
Even for the people who had something to complain about, and justifiably so in some cases, they are having a blast.
Yeah.
That's the great unifier of what a Super Bowl does as an American cultural experience.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about ticket prices. So every year there's always a news story about how much they go for on the auction sites, and the armchair economist in me has always wondered, why don't they just charge the market clearing price for the tickets to begin with?
They've been headed that way. So my first Super Bowl in the director's chair, I guess, was in 2006, and tickets were $400 and $500. And the secondary market was largely shady. you didn't have these marketplaces that are much more legitimate today. So, you were really taking a chance back then if you were buying tickets on the open market. So they didn't really track it the same way as they do today. Today, the lowest ticket price is $950, and the highest ticket price is $4,500. So if you think they haven't closed that gap, you're making more money than I thought, because it went from $400 to $950 and $500 to $4,500. So they got there. The other thing that the NFL is doing is they are now in the secondary ticket business. So they can actually resell the ticket they already sold through their acquisition of Prime Sport and through On Location, which is now, they own a percentage of, 49% of this ticket packager and secondary ticket outlet. So they are actually participating in the secondary market now. And so the gap is significantly shrunk, but they also have an incentive to keep it because now they participate in it.
This will be our last question.
Hello, I wrote down my question. So first of all, thank you for coming and sharing. I'm a fan of all things NFL and specifically a Raiders fan. Not sure if that's a popular thing to disclose to the San Francisco planning team, but I'm unabashed in that regard.
Great.
So this is something that I'm not sure if you're at liberty to discuss, but I'm interested to hear how national security, emergency preparation concerns factor into the decision-making process, and how do those considerations restrict what is possible, and what are some things we could have had it were it not for those concerns?
I'm not going to address the things that could have, because your imagination can take you there.
Yeah.
But the Super Bowl is a level 1 national security event. It's the only annual one, and that requires a security perimeter which is pretty significant around the stadium. So typically it's 2.5 miles worth of fencing and barricading. Everyone who goes to the stadium goes through a magnetometer, just like going to the airport. Now some of the events like Super Bowl Village didn't have this issue. Super Bowl Boulevard here in New York didn't have that issue. In San Francisco, you had the issue. So they've actually started to enclose the free fan events as well, and you go through magnetometers for that too.
So we had 1 million people in 9 days come to downtown San Francisco, and they had to go through a security checkpoint to get screened. We also, of the 5,500 volunteers that we had to submit each one of them for a background check.
Every one of them gets
Everyone
FBI
gets checked.
background.
So it's a wide-ranging sort of a thing to sort of protect. And then we actually, at the event, we had security, with a presence, with weapons and stuff, which, a lot of people want to get their picture taken with them, which was another issue.
But most of it you don't see.
You don't
right.
see.
Yeah, most of it you don't see. And there's a temporary flight restriction at TFR. Commercial air traffic has to be diverted away from stadiums, and which becomes really difficult when your stadium is right next to an airport. But there's, for example, all of the corporate folks that come in on private jets, they can't leave until an hour after the game. If they want to cut out early and get to their plane, that plane's not taken off till an hour after the game. So there's a lot of those kinds of things.
It's a multi-agency effort, federal, regional, state, local.
Everybody's there.
And you're working on it for a year.
Yeah.
Right, November before our Super Bowl, which was only just a few months, we had both the Paris and San Bernardino attacks happen. And so bringing everyone back together to just double check, triple check every single thing, you feel very fortunate because of all the planning that has gone into place. You really feel very strongly about it and very good about it. But then you're in a place where you feel very uncomfortable all of a sudden. So to be able to have all those plans in place and then to build on what has been happening Super Bowl after Super Bowl after Super Bowl does give you that comfort level.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here, and thanks for sharing your stories. Clap real quick. Thank you. I did want to quickly highlight that we do have the Big Game, Bigger Impact for sale in the back, and Pat and Steph will be there to sign if you want a copy. So thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.